Hello guys and welcome back to another video, and today we're back with Alternate Future. This is Alternate Future episode 5, and I'm going to be mass recording these because I got a long weekend and people want more uploads, so I might as well do a few episodes now. Anyways, let's get into the video. I'm going to start off with Europe. Now, Europe has had a lot of political maneuvering to do over the past couple episodes, and one of those major things is that some governments want unification, so others don't. Germany and Austria are going to have talks about a semi-unification. What do I mean by semi-unification? Well, let's look down in Africa. This federation thing, that's basically what they're aiming to do, where Austria and Germany would be equals in a federation. And there would be a referendum in Austria and Germany, in both countries, saying to the population, hey, do you want to form a federation? Call it the German Federation. Some people will get that reference, that historical reference, but let's see what the people say. The Germans will be all for it. I feel like the Austrians would be less supportive for it, but at the end of the day, I feel like they would join. So now we have the German Federation in Europe, which also brings an invitation to other countries with small German majorities, such as Poland and Czechia. The Germans also send a referendum, or want to hold a referendum. But, okay, so this referendum in Czechia goes like this. They agree, they don't agree, because they're not majority German. The Austrians are close enough to be full German, so it would make sense on why they would join. But who knows, maybe the Germans can expand in the future, but for now, they formed a federation/union with Austria. Anyways, let's see what other countries are struggling right now. Russia is probably going to be one of them. Russia needs a place to expand because right now they've lost a lot of territory and they need to build back up strength. What's a country that would be easier to take over? I feel like Kazakhstan. So Russia will go into a special military operation into Kazakhstan, as they'd call it. They haven't gotten over that code words that they like, especially in Ukraine, I'm guessing. So they are going to go and push into Kazakhstan. Now their army's going to be restricted as for the peace treaty, but it's been long enough and a lot of politics has been ascended. You know, this is pretty much the only time that the Russians can get to do this, so they're going to use that time greatly. And since they've learned, or I at least expect them to learn from their past mistakes, their army does significantly better. But as soon as Russia gets this far, other nations are going to be like, hold on, if Russia expands now, then they're going to be an unstoppable power later. We can't have that. So all these other countries join in. Now I know that there's a lot of tension, especially around these fellas, but the reason is sound enough to where I feel like they could do it together. There would still be some tension underlying, but this is to kick out the Russians, which could compromise all their independence. So it'll just be one of those rare times where enemies work together. They managed to push back the Russians and do a small invasion into Russia on multiple fronts. Now here's where Russia's like, oh, is this going to be a copy of the previous war we had? We can't have that going on. So now they send more and more troops down. And this war would probably be a slug. Kind of like the war in Ukraine right now. I mean, there's so many deaths, but for only so little to gain. Eventually the Russians would push them back in, but a giant stalemate would have to be placed down in the war. Who's really winning here now is the question. Well, the blue team won't give up unless Russia surrenders. So, who else is going to join the war? The blue team's going to get Ukraine into the war. I know this is controversial, or maybe not, but I feel like Ukraine would probably take this chance to weaken the Russians, especially in this timeline. And the Ukrainians would push out, especially around the Black Sea, which is where they control most of it. Because, yeah, Russia, after the war with Ukraine, would probably have a lot of restrictions, especially around the Black Sea. So with the Russians distracted, the Ukrainians would push through and do a lot of damage to the Russians, especially in the Caucasus. And here's where the Russians have to pull out a lot of troops from Kazakhstan to deal with Ukraine. And with this advantage, they're going to push the Russians back out, and even do a small-scale invasion of Russia themselves. Now, Russia's not really in a place for, war winning, so they're gonna probably look out for allies and see, who wants to join me and save my butt. And China would be hesitant, but they're not gonna join. They're too smart to join. If Russia gains too much power, then they can probably harass the Chinese government, which they don't really want, I'd have to say. So yeah, the Russians are getting beat up again. That's basically the story here. I mean, the Russians will get some minor scale stuff, but at the end of the day, the soldiers would probably get fed up and rebellions would start to occur, especially close to Ukraine, which would force the Russians to eventually, well, they can't recruit any more people, so once the front lines connect over here, the Russians decide it's peacetime. So what will the peace deal be? Starting with Ukraine. There's a good chunk of people over here that actually want to join Ukraine, so I feel like they'd let that happen. On the Black Sea, I feel like Ukraine would probably restrict Russia's coastal access, but that's pretty much it. But Ukraine is becoming a more powerful country in this universe. Although, there's probably going to be controversial politics right after this war, though, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. Now, does Kazakhstan gain some land? Absolutely. They gain a little bit of land from there, and definitely a little land from there. But the other countries want to gain land too, but they kind of can't. There's more of a... On their side, it's more of, if Russia expands, then they could go for us next kind of thing. So I guess they're not getting any land. The Russians are now extra weak. This is horrible for them. I mean, everybody in Russia is fed up right now. They're like, oh, come on! Again? This is horrible. And there's gonna be a lot of tension, but we'll keep a good watch on them. They're not broken up into a civil war yet, but you never know. Maybe. Let's see, in other places. We haven't really done much in the actual Middle East, other than, over here. So I feel like there's a due war over here. There's going to be an insane dictator in Iraq again that's going to go to war with Iran again. Who would have thought? So this is just another repeat war of a war that's previously happened in history. Repeat wars are common in history, although some people might find it unrealistic. But they do, in our timeline, an initial blow to the Iranians. But the Iranians would eventually push them out. And then they would start to invade Iraq. And with Iraq getting beaten up, up, right, left, and center, the Saudis are going to join in to try to get some land from down here. It's all about, what's it now? Oil! Oh yeah. So the Saudis would probably get a lot more than the Iranians. But let's see this peace deal right now. I feel like they'd probably want to divide Iraq. So they'd probably divide it like this. Iraq is gone. There'd probably be a lot of people opposing this in the world, but who's really gonna stop this from happening? That's the real question. In times like this, who's gonna really stop it? That's the major thing here. Let's go back into Africa. What other countries would like to join the Federation? I feel like down here in Africa, we'd have a few willing participants. And now this Federation is absolutely getting really, really big. But eventually, we're going to hold another referendum. Everybody in the union's like, oh yeah, let's get them in. And then they're gonna hesitantly join, but they need, under the promise that they get to reunify, in which they do. So now the Federation's gonna be a global power. It's probably in the top 10 global powers right now. This is close to being an absolute superpower. But even though it's close to being a superpower, doesn't mean it has the capability of being one. At least not right now. Let's be honest. A lot of these states in the Federation are underdeveloped, and they need a big project to develop the territories here. So with the aid from a lot of countries, they'd begin a project to enhance the entire Federation, every single state. And the aims of, in the next 2 decades, making it a lot better to live in. So what else happens now? What's a continent we never touched on? Probably around Oceania. That's the only continent we haven't actually touched yet. Papua New Guinea, after a lot of struggle, would probably vote and join Indonesia. It's maybe a bit wacky to some people, but come on, look at this border now. You can't tell me that these borders don't look good. Also, Portugal would be like, oh yeah, just take them over, we don't really care. So now Indonesia's big, and they have the good juicy borders that every Indonesian probably dreams of. And so, what's going to happen in South America? There's going to be a small-scale war between two countries. These two countries, in this order. There's going to be a very micro war, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. They're going to send their army out, or their police even, not even their real army. They'd send their police out and make a small invasion. The authorities from over here would be like, hey, wait, what's going on down here? So they go down and then they kind of expel them. This would cause Paraguay to be like, hey, what's this? So then they're like, hang on, let's get a bigger invasion force, and they start to invade in. Now, they'd probably go in and invade from up here with their local forces. And they'd probably expel them, and then they're like, okay. They'd probably get back in there. They agree to a minor border change. That's what this whole little incident's gonna be about. So, what's the land being swapped around? You get that land, and you get that land. A little land transfer, yippee. You love tiny land transfers in this wacky, military-focused series, don't ya? So now South America has changed, but it's the least changed continent in the world right now. Anyways, that's going to be it for this episode. I know this episode isn't the biggest, but I'm going to be making more episodes or trying to release them multiple days in a row now. So, that's about it. See ya.